Hello, this is the video for questions 46 through 50 of the final exam review for Math 1050. Question 46 gives me the perimeter of a rectangle as 49.6 centimeters, and then the diagonal is 20 centimeters, and they want me to find the lengths of the sides. So the first thing I like to do is draw myself a rectangle, and I'll label one side, or like these two opposite sides, X, and these two Y. So the perimeter is when you add them all up, so that's X plus X, which is 2X plus Y, and that total is 49.6. And then they give me the diagonal, which is 20. So what can I do with that? I can treat this right triangle to the Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to have x squared plus y squared equals 20 squared. Because if I have two unknowns, I need two equations. And they gave me enough information for two equations. So at this point, what most people will do is take probably the top one and solve it for one of the letters. So if I first of all, I can simplify it. I can divide everything by 2 in that top one just to reduce it down a little bit. So I get x plus y equals 49.6 divided by 2, which is 24.8. And you can do that on your calculator. So if I solve this for y, I would subtract x. So I get y equals 24.8 minus x. And the reason I'm doing that is because now I can substitute this value, which is the equivalent of y, into this equation so that I end up with an equation that only has x's. So I'm going to put 24.8 minus x squared. So I'm replacing the y with 24.8 minus x equals, and 20 squared is 400. All right, and now you're just going to solve this for x. So I need to FOIL 24.8 minus x times 24.8 minus x equals 400. X squared plus 24.8 times 24.8 is 615.04. 24.8 times minus x is minus 24.8x, and then minus x times 24.8 is minus 24.8x. Negative x times negative x is plus x squared equals 400. So I can combine the x squares to get 2x squared. I can combine these two, minus, what was that, 49.6x, and then plus 615.04 equals 400. So now that I see that I have a quadratic, because the highest power is 2, I need to set this to 0 so that I can use my quadratic formula. So if I subtract 400, I get 2x squared minus 49.6x plus 215.04 equals 0. And at that point, I'm just gonna use this board. So I'll put that down later. Now, you could plug these into the quadratic formula the way they are, but if you can reduce everything, then it just makes the quadratic formula easier. So if I divide everything by 2, I'll get x squared minus 24.8x plus 215.04 divided by 2 is 107.52, and then 0 divided by 2 is 0. So now I would choose to use these as my a, b, and c. So a is 1, b is negative 24.8, c is 107.52. So I get negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, and that will give me my x. So I get 24.8 plus or minus 615.04 minus 4 times 107, whatever that is. So this is all in the square root, all over 2. 4 times 107.52 is 430.08. And then 615.04 minus that will give me 24.8 plus or minus the square root of 184.96 all over 2. And if I take the square root of that, I get 13.6. So I get x equals 24.8 plus or minus 13.6 all over 2. So 24.8 plus 13.6 divided by 2 gives me 19.2. And 24.8 minus 13.6 divided by 2 gives me 5.6. So I get two answers because I have two different lengths of sides. So one of them is 5.6 and the other one is 19.2. All right, let's move on to question 47. In 47, they want me to draw this graph with these inequalities. So first I have x is less than or equal to 2. Anytime I have x equal a number, or x with a number and there's no y, it's a vertical line. This is going to go through 2 on the x-axis, and it's solid because there's an or equals. If x is less than 2, that means I'm going to shade the left side. Now I'm going to go y is less than 7. Anytime I have y and a number without an x, it's going to be a horizontal line. In this case, it'll be at 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's going to be dotted because there's no or equal to part. And less than means I'm going to be down here. And then finally I have 3x plus 4y is greater than or equal to 12. So you could solve this for y so that you have y equals mx plus b if you prefer to graph that way. For this problem, it's actually easier to plug in zeros. So if x is 0, this term goes away. And if I divide there, I get y equals 3. So when x is 0, y is 3. There's a point. And when y is 0, this will go away. Divide by 3, I get 4. X is 4. So when y is 0, x is 4. There's 2 points. It's greater than or equal to. So this is going to be a solid line. Now, how do I know what side to shade for greater than or equal to? The other two were kind of easy because it just felt like a number line. But here, what I do is I choose a test point. And so I can choose anything that's not on the line. So if 0, 0 is available, I will choose it. So if I put 0 in for x and y, I get 0 plus 0 is greater than or equal to 12. And I ask myself if that's a true statement. And then the answer is no. 0 is not greater than or equal to 12. Therefore, 0, 0 is not in the solution side. So it has to be the other side that is the solution side. So what I'm going to shade then is just this little triangle and not any of this other stuff. And that is the solution to that problem. So let's move on to question 48. It's the one that I had erased. So question 48 gave me parentheses y minus 2 squared equals 3 times x minus 1. My pen is running out of ink. Let's see if I can get another pen. So for this problem, they wanted me to find the vertex and the focus and the directrix and the axis of symmetry of this parabola. So here's what I do for these. I go back to what I know. What I know is for a very long time, we've been working with y equals x squared. And most of you by now know that that's a parabola. And you know that it's facing up because x squared is positive. So if you take a look at what's happening here, notice that the y is what's being squared. But it is positive. Okay, so if the y is being squared, instead of it being an up or down question, it's going to be a left or right question. So a positive y squared is going to make this thing go to the right. So far I know it goes to the right. And I believe you have this formula in your formula sheet or whatever. But they put this little 4p in front of it, in front of the non-squared term, and that's going to come into play in just a second. So how do I find the vertex? Well, it's going to be the opposite of what's in the x and y parentheses. So if it had not had parentheses, it would just been 0, 0. But in this case, it's going to be 1, 2. So that's my vertex. So the reason I wanted to figure out what's happening with the pictures, because now I can go 1, 2 is my vertex, but I know this thing is moving to the right. It's pointed to the right. So that helps me kind of map this together. That means my focus needs to be somewhere inside here. My directrix is going to be the same distance on the other side as a line, and it'll be a line that looks kind of like your parabola is like the saucer, I did a really bad job on that. Like let's say you have a cup and then a saucer under it, right? So the saucer will be the directrix and it'll fit under the cup, whichever way the cup is oriented. So in this case, my directrix will be here. If my parabola is faced like that, my directrix would be there. If my parabola is like that, the directrix would be there. So that just helps a little bit with the visual. All right, so how do I find my focus? Well, that's where this 4p comes into play. So the y squared part was here, and it was expanded, -2. That helped me with my vertex. The x part is here. It was expanded. That helped me with my vertex. So the 4p part is the 3. So I'm going to go 3 equals 4p. So p equals 3/4. So if p equals 3/4, then what that means is p is the distance from the vertex to the focus. So I'm going to move 3/4 of a distance, so 0.75, let's say, to here, and that will be my focus. Which way am I moving? This is why I drew my picture. The x is what's moving to the right. So my x was 1, I'm going to add 3/4, so that's 1 3/4, which you could write as 7/4, or you could write as 1.75, depends on how the question wants you to answer it. And then what's the y value? The y didn't change, so that's 2. So the map is really helpful for me. Then what does that tell me about my directrix? It means I'm going to move backwards 0.75, and that's where my directrix line is going to be. It's a vertical line because my parabola is laying on its side, face to the right. All vertical lines are x equals something. Well, what would it be? If x was 1 here and I subtract 3/4, then I'll end up with 1/4. So the directrix is x equals 1/4. And then finally, the axis of symmetry is what would intersect the vertex and the focus. So in this case, it's a horizontal line, which are always y equals a number. What is that number? Well, we know that these two are sitting at 2 on the y-axis. So the axis of symmetry is y equals 2. All right, so let me move to question 49. So 49 gives me a picture of half an ellipse. So I've got this, I think that's hard to see. Hang on, I'll go with this really fat pen. Okay, so I've got this graph, and they put this ellipse like that, and they tell me that the whole length from here to here is 152, and there's a point here P, and this distance is 25, and this distance is 56. And they want to know what's the distance from point P down to this ellipse. Okay. So when you have an ellipse as a picture, then you're going to use the ellipse equation, which is, and by the way, you know, if you have the option, so that, you know, they didn't tell me where this was oriented on the graph, so I'm just orienting it at 0, 0 for the center, because that makes everything easier. So the equation for an ellipse is x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared equals 1. A is always the longest direction, so my ellipse is longer in the x direction, so the a goes under the x, and my b is the shorter one, so it goes under the y. I don't have an expansion here like x minus 2 squared and a y plus 1 squared. If I did, that would reorient my center, but I'm keeping my center at 0, 0 so that my equation is easier. Okay, so B is the distance, or let's start with A. A is the distance from the center to the edge along the major axis. So my center to my edge would be half of 152, so that would be 76. So that's my A. So I'm going to write x squared over 76 squared plus y squared. That means B is the distance from the center to along the minor axis or whatever to the ellipse. So this was 56. So I'm going to write 56 squared equals 1. So now I have an equation. And if I know that this is 25 over, that means this point is going to be 25 comma something. And that's what I'm looking for, is that something. What is the y value of this point? But I have enough information then that I could plug the 25 in for x, and then all I need to do is solve for the y to get my answer. So 25 squared over 76 squared. They said that you can round this to the nearest hundredth, I think. So there's no reason then why you couldn't go ahead and just convert these to decimals right off the bat. So if I have 25 squared divided by 76 squared, I get 0.1082 whatever. And if I subtract that from 1, then I'm going to end up with y squared over 56 squared equals 0.89179. Now I'm going to times that by 56 squared. I get y squared equals 2796.6648. And then the last thing that I need to do is take the square root of both sides. So if I take the square root of that, I get 52.88. And even though it would actually be a negative 52.88, if you're looking at the position of this, they were just asking for that distance. So you would just, a distance is always positive. So the last question, number 50, says if you have a sub n equals 5n over 2n plus 5, they want you to find the first 4 terms. So the n represents what term you're working on. So if I want my first term, I would make n 1, which means everywhere in the problem n has to be a 1. So 5 times 1 over 2 times 1 plus 5 equals 5 over 7. That's my first term. My second term, n is going to be 2. So I get 10 over 4 plus 5 is 9. My third term, 5 times 3 over 2 times 3 plus 5 is 15 over 11. And if you start to see a pattern, you could certainly just do that, right? The numerators are jumping by 5, the denominators are jumping by 2. So the last one, 5 times 4 over 2 times 4 plus 5 is 20 over 13. And that's it. I'll talk to you later.